What would you do if the man you trusted with your life betrayed you with your best friend? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Veil of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. Tonight's story follows Ella Bennett, a brilliant doctor whose world collapses when she discovers her husband's affair with the very woman she once called sister. But just when her heart turns to ashes, a mysterious stranger steps in, offering her one dance that could change everything: love, betrayal, and redemption, hidden beneath the veil of hearts. Rain whispered against the windows of a dimly lit bar, the kind of place where lost souls went to forget who they were. The air was heavy with the scent of whiskey and regret, and somewhere in the far corner, Ella Bennett sat alone, her fingers wrapped around a glass of bourbon that had long lost its warmth. The ice had melted, but she hadn't moved in minutes. The soft blue light washed over her face, tracing the quiet sadness in her eyes. To anyone watching, she looked composed, a woman in control, perfectly poised. But in the reflection of that glass, there was exhaustion, the kind that no amount of sleep could cure. She used to believe that love was unbreakable. 5 years ago, she was a bright young doctor, full of life and dreams. And back then, Ryan Carter was the man everyone said was perfect for her: ambitious, loyal, a self-made entrepreneur with a spark in his eyes and promises too beautiful to question. They met at a charity event at the hospital. He brought flowers for the patients. She smiled at how clumsy he looked among all the medical jargon. It started simple: shared coffee breaks, laughter that felt easy, and the unspoken warmth that grew between them like sunlight after rain. 2 years later, they were inseparable. Their wedding was small but beautiful. Nothing fancy, just two hearts promising forever. And for a while, forever seemed real. Their apartment smelled of morning coffee and fresh lilies. On nights when she came home late from the hospital, Ryan would wait up, half asleep on the couch, murmuring, "You save lives all day, Ella. Now come, let me save you from yourself." Those were the nights she thought she was the luckiest woman alive, until the call came. It was a familiar voice, warm, nostalgic. Lara Collins, her best friend from college. Lara had been abroad for years, chasing degrees and dreams across London. "Ella," she said over the phone, her voice honey-sweet, "I'm finally back, but I'm struggling to find work. Didn't you say Ryan's company was growing? Maybe there's a place for me there?" Ella smiled without hesitation. She'd always been the kind of person who believed that helping others made the world kinder. So that night, she mentioned it to Ryan over dinner. "Lara just came back. She's smart, experienced. Maybe you could use someone like her?" Ryan shrugged, setting down his fork. "We do need a secretary. If she's anything like you, she'll fit right in." He smiled. She smiled back. It felt harmless. It felt right. But that was the moment everything began to crack. Lara joined the company a week later. Sharp suit, bright lipstick, and confidence that filled every room she entered. At first, Ella thought she was just being paranoid when she noticed the subtle changes. Ryan started working late. "Client meetings," he said. He stopped texting her goodnight, and Lara's messages came more often. Casual things at first. "Hey, thanks again for helping me out." "You're the best." Then, "Your husband's doing great under pressure. You should be proud." Then silence. The kind of silence that makes your heart ache because it knows something before your mind does. Weeks passed, and Ella tried to drown her suspicions under her workload. She told herself she was imagining things, that Ryan would never cross that line. After all, this was the man who used to drive across town just to bring her soup when she had a fever. But one night, after a grueling 14-hour shift, she came home early. The apartment lights were dim. A woman's laughter drifted from the living room, a laugh she recognized instantly. Her world froze. Ella stood there, her pulse thundering in her ears. On the couch, Ryan sat with Lara, too close, too comfortable. A silk scarf, Lara's scarf, lay tangled beside his hand. They didn't see her at first. For a second, she thought maybe she'd walked into a dream, or a nightmare that looked too much like home. When Ryan finally looked up, his face drained of color. Ella, it's not what you think. Then tell me, she whispered. What is it? He hesitated. That hesitation was all the answer she needed. The next morning, Ella packed her things in silence. No yelling, no begging, no tears. She simply left the key on the counter and walked out. Outside, the rain was falling again, soft, relentless, like the sky was crying for her. And as she stepped into the cold, she realized something that made her chest tighten. She had spent years healing other people. But now, there was no one left to heal her. The rain had stopped by morning, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. Ella moved through her empty apartment like a ghost, every sound echoing too loud, every breath a reminder of what used to fill that space. Where laughter once lived, there was nothing now but the faint hum of the refrigerator and the echo of her own heartbeat. She didn't look back when she closed the door. She couldn't. For days afterward, she went to work like nothing had happened. At the hospital, her hands stayed steady, her voice calm. To everyone else, Dr. Bennett was as brilliant as ever, saving lives, solving chaos. But inside, she was breaking quietly, one breath at a time. Meanwhile, at the Carter office, Lara had already filled the void Ella left behind. It began innocently, as these things often do. Lara wasn't the kind of woman who rushed. She was deliberate, calculated. She understood the art of making a man feel seen. Ryan was a man who thrived on admiration, and Lara, she gave it in doses sweet enough to taste like loyalty. You're incredible. Ryan, she'd say, leaning over his desk. Her perfume a soft storm. You built all of this on your own. People should talk about you more. Ryan would chuckle, brushing it off, but he didn't stop her. He liked the way her words filled the room, how they echoed what he'd always wanted to hear. At home, Ella rarely said things like that. Not because she didn't believe in him, but because she believed he already knew. It started with late meetings. We just need to review one last proposal. Then dinners. It's easier to talk without the noise of the office. Then touches. Accidental at first, lingering later. One night, Lara placed a file on his desk and said softly, "You know, she doesn't appreciate you the way she should." Ryan frowned. "Lara, that's not fair, isn't it?" She pressed. "You work yourself to death for her comfort, her pride. But when was the last time she even looked at you the way I do right now?" He should have stopped it there. But the truth was, Lara's words hit the one wound he'd never admit he had, the need to feel important. At home, Ella was fading. Not as a wife, but as a woman drowning in her own exhaustion. She came home past midnight, eyes heavy, hands trembling from another emergency shift. Sometimes she found him asleep on the couch, the TV flickering in the dark. She'd smile weakly, kiss his forehead and whisper, "I'm sorry, love. Just a few more weeks. Things will slow down." He never told her they already had, just not in the way she hoped. Back at work, Lara knew exactly when to press harder. She'd lean in too close, laugh at his tired jokes, touch his arm when he spoke about stress. Every movement was a language, and Ryan, though he didn't speak it fluently, understood enough to fall for its comfort. The first time it happened, it wasn't planned. Or maybe it was, just not by him, a late night. Too much wine, too little guilt, one moment of quiet between two people who had spent too long being seen, but never truly known. When Lara kissed him, it felt like validation, not betrayal. And when he didn't pull away, it turned into something darker. Afterward, Ryan sat in silence, shirt half-buttoned, staring at the floor. "This can't happen again," he muttered. Lara smiled, brushing his collar with her fingers. "Of course not," she said softly, knowing full well it would, and it did, again and again. Each time he found a new reason to justify it. "Ella doesn't have time for me. It's just stress. It's not love, but lies, no matter how softly whispered, have a way of sounding like truth when repeated in the dark." Meanwhile, Ella continued saving lives. Every patient she revived was a distraction from the one part of her own heart she couldn't heal. She didn't know the affair had continued, not yet. But her body felt it, in ways her mind couldn't name. The restless nights, the cold mornings, the way Ryan's embrace felt like politeness rather than passion. At work, her colleagues called her the unbreakable doctor. They were wrong. She wasn't unbreakable. She was simply good at hiding the cracks. One evening, as she left the hospital, the city lights blurred in the rain. She thought about calling Ryan, maybe surprising him with dinner. Then she remembered the last time she tried that, how he'd said he was in a meeting and hung up too quickly. The doubt returned, quiet but sharp, slicing through her chest like glass. Still, she pushed it away, because love, real love, wasn't supposed to be suspicious. It was supposed to be trusting, and that's exactly what made it dangerous. Lara, on the other hand, played her part flawlessly. At work, she called him Mr. Carter. Outside, she whispered Ryan. In the office, she was professionalism. In private, she was chaos wrapped in silk. Every lie she told was coded in tenderness. Every kiss was a promise of destruction disguised as devotion. And Ryan, foolish, craving, blind, believed every single one. By the time Ella finally learned the truth, it wasn't from a confession. It was from the silence that followed, the way he stopped meeting her eyes, the way he spoke to her like she was a guest in her own marriage. But that discovery, that moment when everything shatters, that belongs to another night. A night when the truth will no longer whisper behind her back, but stand right in front of her, wearing her best friend's perfume. Days blurred into weeks, and weeks into a quiet kind of numbness. Ella had built her life around motion, saving lives, working late, never standing still long enough for grief to catch her. But grief always finds a way. It was a Friday night when she decided to stop pretending she was fine. The hospital corridors had emptied hours ago. Her shift was over, yet her thoughts refused to rest. So instead of going home, she turned left, toward the city lights. Toward the place she once swore she'd never step into again, the same bar, the same dim light, the same song humming through the speakers like a heartbeat she'd forgotten. She took a seat at the far end, her back to the crowd, eyes fixed on the golden liquid in her glass. Her reflection stared back at her, older, sharper, quieter. The bartender recognized her. "Rough day, Doc?" Ella's lips twitched into a half-smile. Something like that. She didn't come for company. She came for silence. But silence had a cruel sense of humor. Because when she finally lifted her eyes from the glass, she saw them, Ryan and Lara, laughing, holding hands. The same hands that once held hers. The same laugh that once belonged to her friend. Her chest tightened, but her face remained still. Perfectly still. Only her fingers betrayed her, gripping the glass until her knuckles turned white. She could feel the tremor running through her hand, the heat rising up her throat. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Some wounds demand to be seen before they can heal. Lara leaned in close to Ryan's ear, whispering something that made him smile. He looked happy, effortlessly, cruelly happy, and that hurt more than the betrayal itself. Ella's breath caught. She turned slightly, hiding behind her curtain of dark hair. But it was too late. Ryan's eyes met hers across the room. For a second, the world went silent. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, everything froze. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by guilt, and then something worse. Pity. Ella's pulse quickened. She hated that look. She'd rather he despised her than pitied her. She forced her lips into a calm line, turned back to the bar, and took a sip of her drink. The burn of whiskey grounded her, but not enough. That's when she heard a voice. Low. Deep. Smooth like smoke. "You look like you're either about to cry, or make someone regret every choice they ever made." The words came from the man standing beside her. He wasn't there a moment ago, tall, sharp suit, sleeves rolled just enough to show the veins in his forearms. A silver watch caught the dim light, but it was his eyes, dark, unreadable, that held her. Ella didn't respond right away. She just studied him through the glass. "And which one do you think it is?" He smiled, slow, deliberate. "I'd say you're deciding." She almost laughed. The corner of her mouth curved, not in amusement, but resignation. "If you must know, my ex-husband's across the room. With someone familiar?" The stranger tilted his head slightly, following her gaze. His eyes landed on Ryan and Lara, still laughing, still touching. He hummed softly. "That explains the look." "What look?" she asked. "The one that says, 'I'm fine,' when every muscle in your body is screaming otherwise." Ella blinked, caught off guard by his accuracy. For a moment she didn't feel observed. She felt seen. She exhaled slowly, almost laughing at herself. "I must be pathetic if even strangers can read me." "Pathetic?" he repeated, raising a brow. "No, I'd call it honest." He paused, then extended his hand. "Come on." "Dance with me," she stared at him. "Excuse me?" "You need to breathe. Trust me. It helps." Her eyes flicked toward Ryan's direction. Ryan was watching now, expression tense, possessive even. Of course he was. Ella gave a short, humorless laugh. "He's watching." The stranger leaned closer, his voice a low whisper that brushed against her ear. "Then let him watch. Let him know exactly what he lost." Something inside her snapped, or maybe awakened. Before she could second-guess it, she placed her hand in his. The contact was electric, warm, steady, grounding. He led her toward the center of the room. The lights dimmed. The slow rhythm of a song began to pulse through the air. Around them, people melted into the shadows. But all Ella could see was him, this stranger whose name she didn't even know. He placed a hand gently on her waist. Just enough pressure to guide, not to own. "Relax," he murmured. "You're safe, safe." The word felt foreign. But under his touch, for the first time in months, she almost believed it. Their bodies moved with the music, unhurried, deliberate. Every step erased a memory. Lara's laughter, Ryan's betrayal, the nights she cried alone. Every turn was a rebellion against the pain that had claimed her. Across the room, Ryan's face hardened. His jaw clenched, his hand tightened around his drink. Lara said something to him, but he didn't hear. His eyes were locked on Ella, on the woman he no longer had. The stranger noticed. A ghost of a smirk played on his lips. "He's watching harder now," he said quietly. Ella met his gaze, the corners of her mouth curling up just slightly. Good. For the next few minutes, the rest of the world disappeared. Only the rhythm remained, slow, magnetic, intimate. Ella closed her eyes, and for the first time, the memories didn't hurt as much. When the song ended, the stranger didn't let go immediately. He looked at her, not with desire, but with something quieter, deeper. "He'll regret it," he said simply. Ella tilted her head, searching his face. "And you? Do you always rescue women from their ghosts?" He smiled faintly. "Only the ones who don't realize they've already survived." Then he stepped back, offering a subtle nod, before disappearing into the crowd like smoke dissolving into air. Ella stood there, breathless, her pulse steadying against the silence. Somewhere behind her she could still feel Ryan's stare burning into her back. But for once, she didn't care. Because tonight, for the first time since it all fell apart, she wasn't the broken one anymore. She was the reminder of what he'd lost. The song had ended, but the echo of it lingered in Ella's pulse. For a moment she stayed there, eyes closed, breath trembling, letting the hush of the crowd wash over her. When she finally looked up, the stranger was still holding her hand. His touch wasn't possessive. It was grounding, like an anchor reminding her she was still here, still real. He guided her toward a quiet corner of the bar, where the lights softened and the noise thinned to a low hum. Without a word, he signaled to the bartender. A fresh glass of red wine appeared in front of her. "This one's not for forgetting," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "It's for remembering who you are." Ella hesitated, fingers brushing the rim of the glass. "And who do you think that is?" He studied her for a moment, eyes dark and unhurried. Someone who hasn't looked at herself in a long time. His words hit her harder than the drink ever could. She took a sip, the wine warm and rich on her tongue. For the first time that night, She didn't feel like running. "So," she began softly, "do you make a habit of rescuing strangers from their miserable evenings?" He leaned back, a faint smile curving his lips. "Only when they look like they need someone to remind them how to breathe." She laughed quietly, surprised by how natural it felt. There was something disarming about him. His stillness, the way he filled the silence without crowding it. "You don't talk much," she said. "That depends," he replied. "Some people mistake silence for disinterest. I see it as a chance to listen." He wasn't flirting, not really. His tone carried a weight that made her heart stir for reasons she couldn't name. He wasn't trying to charm her. He was trying to understand her. They talked for a while, the kind of talk that feels effortless yet intimate. She told him about her work, how the hospital never slept, how some nights the line between saving and losing blurred until she couldn't tell which side she stood on. "You're a doctor," he said, more observation than question. She nodded. "Cardiology. I fix hearts for a living." "And yet," he murmured, his gaze steady, "yours is the one that needs the most care." Ella's breath caught. There was no pity in his voice, only quiet truth. "You're very good at reading people," she said. "I've spent most of my life doing it." "Is that your job?" she asked, curious. "Reading people?" He chuckled, a low, amused sound that lingered like smoke. "Something like that." "And what is it that you do, exactly?" He looked down at his glass, swirling the amber liquid slowly before answering. "I manage things. Keep them running smoothly." "What kind of things?" He met her gaze then, and for the first time, she saw it, the flicker of something dangerous behind the calm. "Let's just say I make sure certain problems never reach the surface." There was no threat in his tone, yet the air seemed to shift around him. Ella felt the instinctive chill of someone standing too close to a storm. "Sounds vague," she said carefully. "That's the point," he replied, smiling faintly. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but charged, like the pause before lightning strikes. She looked away first, watching the rain streak against the window. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to believe I could fix anything, that if I just worked harder, loved harder, everything broken could be repaired. And now?" he asked. "Now I'm not so sure people are meant to be fixed." He studied her again, expression unreadable. "Maybe not fixed," he said softly, "but reminded of what it feels like to be whole." His words settled in her chest, dangerous in their gentleness. For a long moment, neither spoke. The bar faded around them, the hum of voices, the clink of glasses, all blurred into something distant. It was just the two of them, sitting in the quiet space where broken things sometimes dared to hope again. Eventually, Ella glanced at her watch. "It's late," she murmured, though part of her didn't want to leave. He nodded slowly, finishing his drink. "Then let me walk you out." Outside, the city was slick with rain, streetlights scattering gold across the pavement. He held the door open. She stepped through, the chill air wrapping around her like memory. They stood there for a moment under the awning, neither reaching for an umbrella. Raindrops tapped softly against the ground between them. "You never told me your name," she said. He smiled, just enough to break the seriousness. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Vega." She repeated it under her breath, as if tasting it. "And you are?" he asked, though she was sure he already knew. "Ella, Ella," he echoed, letting the syllables linger. "It suits you." Soft but steady. The way he said it made her chest tighten. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well, Daniel Vega, thank you for the dance." "Don't thank me yet," he said, his eyes glinting in the light. "You haven't decided if it was a mistake, was it?" He stepped closer, the faint scent of rain and cologne between them. "No," he said simply, "just unexpected." For the first time, she noticed the scar along his jaw, faint, clean, the kind left by something sharp and deliberate. There were stories written on his skin, and she found herself wanting to read them. "You have that look again," he said quietly. "What look?" "The one that says you're thinking too much." Ella laughed softly, shaking her head. Occupational hazard. He nodded once, eyes still on hers. Then think about this, he said. Not every man leaves scars. Some just know how to see them. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and dangerous all at once. She took a step back, feeling her pulse rise. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Ella. As she turned to leave, he called after her, voice calm, steady, certain. When you're ready, he said, let me show you that not all men are the same. She froze for a moment, his words brushing against something deep inside her. Then, without looking back, she walked into the rain. Behind her, Daniel watched, hands in his pockets, eyes unreadable, as the woman who'd just stepped out of her own wreckage disappeared into the night. And for the first time in years, he felt something stir. Not desire, not curiosity, but recognition, the kind that whispered, "This one matters." The rain had stopped hours ago, but the city still smelled of it, clean, sharp, alive. Ella walked through the hospital's main corridor the next morning, her thoughts looping back to the night before. Daniel Vega, his words, his eyes, the way he said, "Not all men are the same," as if he knew exactly what it meant to be broken and still believe. She tried to bury the memory under her usual rhythm of rounds, charts, and endless beeping monitors. But it followed her like a pulse under the surface. At 10 a.m., a nurse walked in holding a paper cup. "Dr. Hale, someone left this for you at reception." On the lid, in black ink, was a single initial. D. Ella froze. The coffee was her favorite, flat white with a hint of vanilla, just the way she liked it. She shouldn't have remembered the scent, but she did. "Did they say who it was from?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "No name. Just told me to give it to you." The nurse smiled, clearly curious, and left. Ella stared at the cup, torn between curiosity and caution. Then she lifted it, took a sip, and closed her eyes. Warmth, calm. A silent message between sips. "I'm thinking of you." She told herself it was nothing. A coincidence, a kind gesture she shouldn't read into. But when it happened again the next day, same coffee, same D, she stopped pretending. By Friday, the exhaustion had set in. The ER had been relentless. 2 surgeries, 1 loss, 100 small miracles that no one would remember. When she finally stepped outside, night had already settled, soft rain tracing the glow of the streetlights. She was halfway to her car when a voice cut through the quiet. "Busiest doctor in the city," he said, "but still forgets her umbrella." Daniel stood under the hospital gate, a dark coat draped over his frame, holding an umbrella like he'd been waiting for hours. Ella stopped, half shocked, half smiling. "Do you always appear out of nowhere?" "Only when it seems like the right moment," he said, walking closer. He held the umbrella above her head. "You shouldn't walk in the rain after patching up half the city. And you shouldn't stalk doctors outside hospitals." He laughed quietly. "Fair point." They stood there for a moment, neither moving, the rain whispering between them. "Let me make it up to you," he said finally. Dinner, no hidden motives, no rain. Just a meal. She hesitated. Her instinct said no. Too soon. Too complicated. But something in his tone, steady, unhurried, almost protective, made her pause. "You don't take no for an answer, do you?" "Only when I'm sure no means no," he said softly. And that was how, an hour later, she found herself seated across from him at a riverside restaurant she didn't even know existed. The place was all amber light and soft jazz, the kind of atmosphere that made the world feel slower, safer. The window beside them looked out over the dark river, its surface broken only by ripples of reflected gold. "You've been here before?" she asked. "Once," he said, "when I needed to remind myself that some places are worth returning to." The waiter poured wine. They didn't talk at first. It wasn't awkward, just charged, the silence alive with everything unspoken. Finally, she asked, "So tell me, Daniel Vega, what exactly do you manage?" He smiled faintly. "You're not going to let that go, are you?" "Not a chance." He set down his glass, fingers tracing the stem. "Let's say I work in logistics. But not the kind with trucks or shipments. I deal in situations. Sometimes people make choices they can't undo. I help them manage the aftermath. There was no arrogance in his tone, no boasting, just quiet certainty. Something about the way he said choices made her skin prickle. So you're a fixer, she said slowly. He tilted his head. Maybe. Or maybe I just believe that everyone deserves one last chance to do the right thing. Even when they've done something wrong? He looked at her then, and the smile vanished. Especially then. The air between them tightened. She didn't know whether to feel wary or seen. You sound like you've made a few questionable choices yourself, she said carefully. Haven't you? She laughed softly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Touché. Their food arrived, grilled salmon for her, steak for him, but neither seemed hungry. The conversation had shifted into something quieter, more intimate. You know, she said after a moment, I used to think justice was simple. Good people do good things, bad people get punished. But the world doesn't really work like that. It doesn't, Daniel agreed. Justice isn't in the law. It's in the choices people make when no one's watching. She looked up at him, searching his face. That's a dangerous philosophy. Only if you lie to yourself. The jazz swelled softly behind them, a saxophone crying in the distance. You talk like someone who's seen too much, she said. He smiled faintly. Maybe I have, or maybe I've just stopped pretending not to. For a long time, she said nothing. She watched him. The subtle confidence, the scars that weren't just on his skin but somewhere deeper, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt safe. Not because she trusted him, but because he didn't ask her to. When dinner ended, he walked her to her car. The air was cool, the river murmuring behind them. Thank you, she said, for tonight. You don't have to thank me, he replied. You just had dinner. You didn't make a promise. Is that what people usually owe you? Promises, he smiled. No, just honesty. She studied him under the streetlight. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. She turned toward her car, then stopped when he said quietly, If the days ever get too heavy and the nights too long, you know where to find me. She looked back, meeting his eyes. Do I? You will, he said, and there was something in his voice, half prophecy, half warning. Ella got into her car, the engine humming to life. As she drove away, she saw him still standing there in the mirror, framed by the glow of the streetlight. The man with too many secrets, and the strange, impossible calm that followed him wherever he went. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop hearing his words. Justice isn't in the law. It's in the choices people make when no one's watching. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure which side of justice her heart belonged to. The nights after their dinner felt lighter somehow, the city softer, her heartbeat slower. Daniel had a way of turning silence into safety. For the first time in years, Ella found herself smiling at small things again. A patient's thank you, a sunrise caught between hospital rooftops, the quiet promise of coffee waiting at her desk, still marked with that familiar D. She didn't know what they were. Friends, strangers orbiting something fragile, or two broken souls meeting halfway. But she knew this. Being near him made her feel seen in a way that frightened her. A week later, they met again. The restaurant was tucked inside a quiet corner of the city. Dark wood, amber light, a jazz trio playing something soft enough to disappear into. Daniel sat across from her, coat off, sleeves rolled, his presence steady as always. They talked. Not about work, not about pain, but about everything in between. Childhood memories, dreams that never happened, how silence could mean comfort or danger depending on who you shared it with. Halfway through dinner, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, just once, and the air around him changed. The warmth in his eyes went cold. He didn't speak, just answered. Yes. His tone was clipped, precise, the kind of voice used for orders, not conversation. Ella watched as he listened. A few seconds passed. His jaw tightened. Then he said quietly, I'll be there in 10. When he hung up, she felt it. The shift. The distance. Work? She asked gently. He nodded once, avoiding her eyes. Something I can't ignore. Daniel, I'll call you, he said. Already standing. He placed a few bills on the table, his movement sharp, deliberate. Then, just before he turned to leave, he looked at her. And for a flicker of a second, regret softened the edge of his expression. Go home safe, Ella. And then he was gone. The next morning, the news broke. 2 dead in what authorities call a coordinated underground settlement. The anchor's voice was calm, sterile, but Ella's stomach dropped. A grainy photo flashed across the screen. The location, the timing, too close to match coincidence. Her hand trembled as she reached for the remote, turning off the sound. She didn't need to see more. She knew. Daniel Vega wasn't just a man who managed situations. He was the situation. She should have felt fear. But all she felt was sorrow. Because even now, knowing what he might be, she couldn't bring herself to stop caring. He didn't show up for 3 days. By the 4th, the worry had turned to ache. She told herself it wasn't her place to ask. That whatever he did, it had nothing to do with her. But when the doorbell rang that night, she was already halfway to the door before realizing how fast her heart was racing. When she opened it, the breath caught in her throat. Daniel stood there, blood on his sleeve, a cut above his brow, exhaustion hollowing the edges of his face. Yet his eyes, they were the same, dark, steady. You're hurt, she whispered. He tried to smile. It came out more like an apology. It's not as bad as it looks. Sit down, she said, already reaching for her medical kit. He didn't argue, just followed quietly, the weight of his steps betraying pain he wouldn't admit. Under the light, the wounds looked worse. A deep gash on his arm, bruises trailing his ribs. Her hands shook as she cleaned them, careful not to meet his eyes. Who did this? She asked softly. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. He looked up then, and the silence that followed felt like a confession. I told you once, he said, voice low, rough. I keep things from reaching the surface. Last night, something broke through. She swallowed hard, pressing the gauze too tightly. He didn't flinch. Daniel? She said, barely a whisper. Who are you, really? For a moment, he didn't answer. Then his eyes lifted. No defenses, no masks, just truth. I'm the only man left who never wanted to hurt you. Her breath hitched. She wanted to believe him. God, she did. But the blood on his skin and the tremor in his voice told a story too heavy to ignore. You scare me, she admitted. I scare myself sometimes, he replied quietly. She tied the last bandage, her fingers brushing his wrist. His pulse was steady. Too steady. You should go to a hospital. I've been to enough places that save lives, he murmured. I'd rather be here. The simplicity of it broke something inside her. She stepped back, arms crossed, unsure what to do with the whirlwind in her chest. I don't know if I can be part of whatever world you live in. I don't want you to be, he said quickly. That's why I keep it away from you. And yet it still found you. He didn't argue. He just looked at her, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. You patch me up anyway. That's what I do. No, he said softly. That's who you are. The words landed heavier than she expected. She sat down beside him, her shoulders brushing his. For a while, neither spoke. The sound of rain began again outside, soft and steady. Then he turned to her, eyes gentler than she'd ever seen them. Ella, he said quietly, if I ever disappear again, don't look for me. You think I could just forget? No, he said. That's what scares me. Her throat tightened. She wanted to reach for him, to ask him to stay, to promise something impossible. Instead, she placed her hand over his, her touch trembling. He stared at it for a moment, then covered her hand with his. Warm, solid, real. For a second, she thought he might kiss her. But he didn't. Instead, he lifted his other hand, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his thumb lingering against her temple. "When you're ready," he whispered, "I'll still be here." Then he stood, slow and careful, every movement edged with pain. He paused at the door, glancing back just once. "Thank you," he said simply. And then he was gone, leaving the faint scent of rain and smoke behind him. Ella sat there in the quiet, her heart a storm she could no longer name. Somewhere deep down, she knew Daniel Vega was the kind of man people ran from. And yet all she could think was, she didn't want to, because for the first time, even in the darkness, she trusted him. The days that followed blurred into quiet routine. Daniel had disappeared again. No calls, no messages, just silence. And yet, it wasn't the same kind of silence that used to suffocate her. This one was heavy, yes, but not hopeless. It was the kind that made her realize she had survived the storm. Ella poured herself into her work, the hospital becoming both sanctuary and distraction. At night, she still caught herself listening for footsteps that never came, for the sound of his low voice at the door. But Daniel Vega had a way of vanishing like smoke, leaving only questions behind, until the night the past decided to knock. It was late, almost midnight, when the doorbell rang. Ella frowned, setting aside her mug of tea. Rain pressed softly against the windows, the city outside half asleep. When she opened the door, her heart stopped. Ryan, he looked different, thinner, paler. The confidence that once defined him stripped down to panic. His tie hung loose and the rain had soaked the edges of his coat. "Ella, please don't close the door. I just need 5 minutes." Her first instinct was to slam it shut, but something in his voice, desperate, broken, made her hesitate. She stepped aside, wordless. He entered like a man stepping into a confessional. "You look good," he said quietly. "Better than I remember." "That's because I am," she replied. The bitterness was gone from her tone. It wasn't anger that drove her now. It was clarity. Ryan took a deep breath, pulling a thick envelope from his coat. He placed it on the table with trembling hands. "I need your help," he said. "Just your signature. Nothing more." Ella crossed her arms. "My signature for what?" "There's an audit," he explained quickly. "They're checking the company accounts. Some documents still have your name. Old assets, joint filings. If you sign off, it'll show everything's in order." She stared at him. "And if I don't?" "Then I'm finished," he said, voice cracking. "They'll freeze the accounts. I could lose everything." He pushed the papers toward her. She didn't touch them. Instead, she studied his face, the familiar lines, the pleading eyes that once convinced her to forgive the unforgivable. "You're still trying to save yourself with someone else's signature," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for much. I brought cash. As a gesture." He opened the envelope, revealing stacks of bills, crisp and uneasy in their silence. "Take it," he said. "You deserve it." "After everything," she almost laughed. "After everything? You think this fixes what you broke?" "No," he said quickly. "But maybe it helps you see I'm not the same man anymore." Before she could answer, another voice came from the doorway. "She doesn't need your money." Ryan turned sharply. Daniel stood there, silent, composed, but unmistakably dangerous. He hadn't made a sound coming in, yet somehow his presence filled the room. His black coat dripped faint rain onto the floor, and his eyes were unreadable. For a moment, no one spoke. Ryan swallowed, visibly shaken. "And you are?" he demanded. Daniel didn't answer. He simply stepped closer, his gaze cold enough to make Ryan flinch. Ella's voice broke the tension. "Daniel, it's fine." "Is it?" he asked quietly, his eyes never leaving Ryan. She took a breath. "It's just business. Nothing more." Daniel gave a small nod, then leaned against the wall, still, silent, watching. Ryan's hands shook slightly as he slid the papers forward again. "Ella, please. Just your signature. You'll never hear from me again." She looked down at the pages, the rows of numbers, the carefully chosen legal phrases. then back up at him. "You once told me I wasn't enough," she said softly, "that I wasn't the kind of woman who could stand beside a man like you." Ryan's face fell. "Ella, I didn't—" "You did," she cut him off. "And maybe you were right. I wasn't enough for the man you were, because I deserved better." Her voice didn't tremble. It was calm, precise, the voice of a woman who had already walked through fire and come out whole. She took the pen, signed the documents carefully, then set it down. "You'll have your signature," she said. "But the payment happens first." Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "You don't trust me?" She gave a soft, humorless laugh. "I don't trust easily anymore." He hesitated, then pulled out his phone, transferring the funds under Daniel's quiet, watchful gaze. When the confirmation tone sounded, Ella nodded. "Now you can go." Ryan looked at her one last time, eyes wide, almost pleading. But whatever hold he once had on her was gone. He turned toward the door, his steps uneven. Just before leaving, he glanced at Daniel. The two men exchanged a wordless stare, one full of threat, the other of quiet warning. And in that moment, Ryan understood. This wasn't a house he could ever enter again. When the door closed behind him, Ella exhaled, her shoulders dropping as if she'd been holding her breath for years. Daniel moved closer, his tone softer now. "You handled that perfectly." "I didn't feel perfect," she admitted. "You don't have to," he said. "You just have to be done." She turned toward him, her eyes glimmering with something between relief and exhaustion. "Do you think I won?" He studied her for a moment, then shook his head gently. "No," he said. "You didn't win by hurting him. You won because you stopped letting him hurt you." She looked down at the signed papers, symbols of a past finally closed. "Feels strange," she murmured. "Like peace should hurt a little." "That's how you know it's real," Daniel said quietly. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You've come a long way, Ella." She smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe I just learned how to stop breaking for people who never look back." Daniel's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. Firm, steady, grounding. "You've already won," he said. "But not through revenge. Through calm." Outside, the rain started again. Soft, cleansing, like the world itself was resetting. And for the first time, Ella didn't feel haunted by the sound. She felt free. After Ryan left, the silence that filled the apartment felt different. Not empty, peaceful. For the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't ache. Days turned into weeks, and life found its rhythm again. Ella woke early, ran before dawn, made her own coffee instead of waiting for someone else to send it. At the hospital, her colleagues noticed the change before she did. The calm steadiness in her tone, the way she laughed more easily now, the light that had returned to her eyes. She didn't talk about Ryan. She didn't talk about Daniel either. But both men had carved their lessons into her heart, one through pain, the other through patience. When Daniel did appear, it was never announced. Sometimes she'd see him outside the hospital, leaning against his car, hands in his pockets, waiting like he had all the time in the world. Other times he'd just send a message. "Outside. Fresh air helps." He never asked where she'd been or who she was with. He never demanded her attention, never filled her silence with noise. He was simply there, like the steady hum of something safe. One evening, after a 14-hour shift, she found him again in the hospital parking lot. The city was painted in dusk, half light, half shadow. He held out a cup of coffee as she approached. "You look like you could use this," he said. She smiled, taking it. "You always know." "It's not hard," he replied. "You wear your exhaustion like perfume," she laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Flattering." They walked for a while. No destination, just the rhythm of footsteps and the low hum of city lights. Finally, she spoke. "I used to think healing meant forgetting. That I had to erase everything that hurt, and now?" he asked. Now I think healing means remembering without breaking." He looked at her, something soft flickering behind his usual calm. "That's harder than forgetting." "Maybe," she said. "But it's real." They stopped by the bridge, the river below shimmering with the reflection of passing lights. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she turned to him, eyes steady, voice barely above a whisper. "You make me believe that some things, even the scary ones, are still worth living for." Daniel's gaze lingered on her, as if memorizing the way she said it. Then slowly he smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "Sometimes," he said, "you have to walk through darkness just to see the light that was meant for you." His voice was quiet, almost a confession. Ella felt the weight of those words settle in her chest. She didn't need to ask what he meant. Both of them had lived through shadows, his made of danger, hers of heartbreak. And somehow, they'd met in the middle, in that thin line between ruin and redemption. Over the following months, they built something wordless. He'd show up when she was buried in work, bring her dinner she forgot to order, drive her home when her shift ran too late. No grand gestures, no promises, just quiet consistency. And slowly, Ella realized, love didn't have to come with chaos. It could be quiet, steady, patient. It could look like someone remembering how you take your coffee, like someone who leaves before dawn but never truly leaves your life. One night, she invited him in after a long walk. They sat by the window, city lights flickering beyond the glass. "You know," she said, "I think I finally understand what peace feels like." "Describe it to me," he said, leaning back, half smiling. "It's when the past stops chasing you," she murmured, "and you stop running." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "Then you've made it further than most. And you?" she asked quietly. "Have you found your peace?" He looked down at his hands for a moment, then met her gaze. "I'm still learning how." There was something in his tone, honesty wrapped in weariness. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. "Then stay," she said softly. "Learn with me." The simplicity of it silenced him. No promises, no confessions, just an invitation, quiet, human, true. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took her hand fully in his thumb tracing the lines of her palm. "You already know," he whispered. "I was never here to be saved." "Then why are you still here?" she asked. "Because you reminded me what it feels like to want to be." The words hung between them, gentle but certain, the kind that didn't need to be followed by a kiss to mean everything. Outside, the night finally cleared. A pale moon broke through the clouds, spilling light across the city. Ella looked out the window, breathing in the quiet, the warmth of his hand still in hers. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for anyone to complete her. She was whole, not because the pain had vanished, but because she had learned to live beside it. And somewhere in the soft distance of that night, Daniel smiled, not the smile of a man hiding secrets, but of one who had finally found something worth staying for. The weeks that followed felt different, softer, quieter, like the world had finally slowed down enough for Ella to breathe again. Her days at the hospital were still long, but the weight that once pressed on her chest had turned into something lighter. A reminder, not a burden. Daniel had kept his word. He didn't interfere, didn't control, didn't demand. He simply appeared when life got heavy, a silent presence on the other side of her days. Then, one Friday evening, her phone buzzed with a message from him. "Meet me tonight." "Same place." She stared at the screen, her heart pausing mid-beat. It had been months since she'd set foot in that bar, the place where everything had begun, where one dance had changed everything. Part of her hesitated. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, guided her back. The bar was almost unrecognizable. Gone were the flashing green lights, the laughter that used to sting, the noise that used to drown her thoughts. Now, it was quiet, intimate. Only a few tables, candles flickering on each one, their glow soft and golden against the walls. The same space, but somehow Reborn. Daniel was waiting by the piano near the corner, a glass untouched in front of him. He looked up when she walked in, that small, knowing smile spreading across his face. "You came," he said softly. "You asked," she replied. "I got curious," he chuckled. "Curiosity suits you." She sat down across from him, setting her purse aside. "So, what's the occasion?" He leaned back slightly, eyes warm but unreadable. "Do I need one? With you? Always." His laugh was quiet, but there was a trace of nostalgia in it, the kind that sits between memory and meaning. For a while they didn't talk. The air between them carried its own language, one built on everything they'd already said, and everything they hadn't. Then Daniel nodded toward the empty dance floor. "Do you remember the first night we met?" Ella smiled faintly. "Hard to forget. I was angry, broken, and slightly drunk." "You were extraordinary," he said simply, "even when you were breaking." She looked at him, really looked, and saw the reflection of her younger self in his eyes. The woman who once walked into this bar, trying to make her ex-husband regret losing her. The woman who thought strength meant not feeling. He stood, extending his hand toward her, palm open, steady. "That night," he said quietly, "you danced to make someone else regret you. Tonight, dance for yourself." Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. Instead, she rose slowly, slipping her hand into his. The touch was familiar now, grounding, safe, real. As they stepped onto the small wooden floor, the bartender dimmed the lights. A single melody began to play, slow, tender, the kind of song that didn't demand movement, only closeness. Daniel placed one hand gently on her waist, the other guiding her fingers. They swayed in silence, not performing, not pretending. Just two people moving through the memory of everything they'd survived. The candles flickered as they turned, casting shadows that danced with them. Shadows of what they used to be, fading softly into light. "Feels different," she whispered. "Because it is," he said. "You're not trying to prove anything anymore." "No," she said, smiling through a breath. "Just trying to feel everything I couldn't before." He pulled her slightly closer, his voice low against her hair. "Then you're finally free." Her eyes closed. For the first time, she let herself sink into the moment. No fear, no guilt, no past tugging at her sleeve. When the music slowed to its final notes, neither of them moved. They just stood there, holding each other, letting the quiet fill what words never could. Finally, Daniel spoke, his tone softer than the candlelight. "The first time we danced, you were lost. Tonight, you found yourself." Ella smiled, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "And you?" she asked. "What did you find?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Something I wasn't looking for, but needed anyway." The last note lingered, fading into silence. They stayed that way for a long moment, two hearts that had once come from opposite ends of chaos, now standing still in the calm. Outside, the night stretched open, quiet and endless, and as the candles burned lower, Ella realized something simple, profound, and unshakable. This wasn't a story about loss anymore. It was about becoming, and in that final dance beneath soft light and steady hands, she finally understood. Some endings are just another way to begin again. Some people walk into our lives just to teach us how pain feels. Others arrive to remind us that love, real love, still exists after the storm. Ella once believed that heartbreak was the end of her story. But standing there, under soft light and steady hands, she learned that healing isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about finding the courage to love again, even when you know how much it can hurt. Because love, in its truest form, isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about choosing to stay, even after life has taught you how to leave. So if you've ever loved, lost, and found yourself again, this story is for you, and maybe, just maybe, it's time to believe that the right person won't complete you. They'll simply remind you that you were whole all along. Have you ever loved again after betrayal? Share your story in the comments. Because somewhere out there, someone might need your reminder that love is still worth the risk.